Okay, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Nick Sargent, and I'm the president of SIA, your association to help the winter outdoor community thrive. We're hosting the town hall Thursdays while we're all safe at home in an effort to keep you informed, answer your questions, and to keep the community engaged. We firmly believe that opening the lines of communication and collaboration will be key to navigate these challenging times. Our goal with these town halls is to provide a forum for cooperation, sharing best practices and ideas, as well as answering your questions. In addition, we have also launched the SIA Industry Hub on our website for the most up-to-date resources and tools, including financial resources. Snowsports.org/COVID Hub. The page is updated daily, so please check back as often as you can. You can also find the winter community on our Facebook group, accessible from the Industry Hub. This is a communication point for all of us to trade ideas, best practices, and ask questions and get answers. Today's town hall, how to understand and nimbly adapt your specialty business to the needs and expectations of the post-COVID-19 consumer. This is the 6th in the series, and we're excited about the group we have assembled today. Ryan Atkinson, President and co-owner of SmartEtailing, and Ben Barenholtz, Director of Demand Generation for Quivers. And of course, our friend and moderator, Kristin Carpenter. Many of you know Kristin, CEO and founder of Verde Brand Communications. Kristin has been a partner of ours for a while, guiding us with her insights on the retail marketplace, and now with her insights on how business can navigate the COVID-19 issue. If you haven't listened to her Channel Mastery COVID-19 related podcast yet, please do so. They're listed in our Industry Hub and on our website. Well, kicking this off with a discussion amongst our panelists and then spending some time answering your questions. Some of those have been sent in advance, and we'll answer those, and we'll answer as many as we can in the time we have allotted. To ask a question, just type it into the Q&A section on your desktop, and we'll answer them in the order that they're received. Thank you again for joining us, and let's kick this off with Kristin now.
Hey there, everybody. It's awesome to be here. Welcome again to SIA's Town Hall panel. First, a heartfelt thank you to SIA. It's very, very heartening to see an organization as dedicated as they are and working as hard as they are to bringing the most relevant resources, insights, data, and information and strategy, as you'll learn today, available to help specialty businesses navigate the incredible challenges being presented with COVID-19 and the recession. Again, check out SIA's resource page at snowsports.org/COVID Hub. No spaces there. So we're going to get down to the brass tacks today on how to evolve our specialty businesses so that we can successfully win the attention of and serve the fast evolving COVID-19 affected and recession affected consumer. You're going to learn some foundational things today in terms of understanding the trends of where the consumer behavior is now and where we think it's going. Yes, that's a little bit of crystal ball, but we have a lot of, I think, great resources here, as well as our two panelists to weigh in on that. And also part strategy in terms of how to prioritize and nimbly adapt our specialty businesses, which is really important as we head into, I think, another season here. And I know that as our season kicks off for 2020-2021 winter, it's going to look different still. Everything continues to evolve. So very, very grateful to have the resources in Ryan and Ben today. They both bring relevant and broader perspectives to how we must change our businesses to operate to match the evolution of today's consumer. Both SmartEtailing and Quivers help businesses across especially outdoor active lifestyle markets actively respond to changing consumer behaviors, especially regarding the unprecedented reliance on digital experiences and interactions our consumers are experiencing today. And we are also consumers, and so we're all in that same boat. I mean, you could look in the mirror and study consumer behavior on many levels. And if there are others in your house, different demographics, you'll probably be pretty close to seeing what different demographics are doing as well. But overwhelmingly, obviously, we're all tethered to our browsers right now. So knowing that the way our consumer is continually evolving in terms of how they're researching, engaging, and buying from specialty businesses will continue to shift. And before we drop in together, I thought it would be good for us to just touch base on how, like, kind of where the consumer is. We have to know where the consumer is now in terms of competing for this consumer's attention. And so I'll kick it off by offering a few insights obtained from an earnings report from Target that actually came out last week. And then we'll tap into our panelists to weigh in on that. And then we'll head into today's discussion. So I believe it was April 24th, Target released earnings for Q1 2020. Obviously, it's not an apples to apples comparison, as Target is a mass retailer, but they've done a lot of things nimbly. And they also really, I think, focused on testing and learning and experiential retail. And while they do have a wide commodity business, they also do have some specialty business facets as well. So links to all the articles and resources mentioned will be at the COVID Hub on snowsports.org as well, just so you know. So a few of the top lines from this earnings report: consumers are obviously prioritizing needs over wants, changing the mix of what they're purchasing through the coronavirus. And that's true across any channel. And so far through April, Target's comparable digital sales obviously increased a huge amount, 275 year over year. That's obviously no surprise. And note that consumers in some regions have been on lockdown for nearly 2 months. So it's important to consider this because they've had plenty of time to build new habits around how they're operating and functioning and shopping, researching today. Also, not a surprise, and a topic we're going to get well into today, same day and curbside services have gained incredible popularity during the pandemic. In April, Target has had weeks when drive-up volume was up to 7 times greater than normal. There were single days when the volume of order pickup was twice as high as Cyber Monday. Analysts expect consumers' new habits to stick as they discover the ease of driving up and having Target employees put purchases in their trunk, or having a shopper from Shipt drop bags of groceries off at their home. And last highlight that I thought would be important to kick off for our discussion today: consumers will continue to prefer a one-stop. So for SIA's membership, I believe it's over 65% of you are year-round businesses, meaning you're already in the thick of it, navigating inventory, staff, digital challenges, and all of the other forced modernization our businesses are going through today. And the focal season, obviously, for our group is winter 2021, still on the horizon, and we're here to get ready for that. So first, I'd like to just tap into Ben and Ryan to offer any insights you have specifically on consumer behavior before I ask Ryan my first question specifically about the bike market. So feel free to drop in, one of you.
I'll start off, Ben. And so thank you all for having me first. This is really exciting. And Kristin, you and I have talked over the years, and I think you're spot on with the Target and not an analogy, but using it as an example, because they're really training the consumer today on kind of how to shop. And I think it's important for us all to know that the rules that govern modern retail apply to the specialty channels as well. And so I think the more that we can kind of use what we learn from those providers in working with the businesses that we do, the better off we are.
Absolutely. Ben, did you want to weigh in on anything that you're seeing specifically at Quivers in terms of consumer behavior change?
Yeah, I can get into the details as we go along. I actually wanted to chime in and kind of reiterate just what Ryan said, because we use similar terminology. So I think it's interesting. The way we look at some of these, major players, Amazon, Target, and the rest. He's right. Like they're training consumers, right? Because we're going to talk a lot about consumer behavior, about the way it is, and that can lead to conversations and debates and But at the end of the day, it is what it is. So in some cases, consumer behavior may not go in the way that we want, right? It might not be ideal. We wish it was a different way, but they are being trained that way sometimes by forces that we can't control. I think we have to meet consumers where they are and deal with it. I think that's an incredibly important context for the whole discussion.
Thank you. That's an absolutely perfect jumping off point. And I will say, in the resource page that we're going to be posting to SIA's Resource Hub, we will have multiple links to articles there, even beyond what we referenced today in our discussion. So with that, my first question goes to you, Ryan. I was hoping you could fill us in on what's happening in the bike market now and how that mirrors consumer behavior changes.
Yeah, thank you. The bike industry has been more on the front lines than I'd say anybody other than grocery right now. So we have a pretty broad look at at least the independent retail component of the industry, because SmartEtailing provides the website platform for about 20% of all bike shops in the U.S. and Canada. March obviously in bike is Super Bowl time. That this is when the weather gets nice and customers start flooding in the doors. So this could not have come along at a worse time for the bike industry. Spring invoices were coming due. Hiring was ramping up, and all of a sudden there was a risk of demand just completely going away and markets being shut down. Thankfully, bike retail in most areas got labeled as an essential service, which I agree with. I mean, I think the mental and physical health aspects of it, the transportation component of it justifies the essential status. But what it has meant is that there's been a lot of consumer demand funneled to bike, because it's one of the retail channels that's open. So many other activities for families have been restricted. And so people have been flocking to the sport. And so what we've seen is really, I mean, I've been in the industry since 1994 and I've never seen anything like it. It's been called a bike boom, and that's really what it is. The channel is being emptied of inventory. Specifically related to this topic, on March 19th, when I look at my analytics dashboard, I can see clearly that's when consumer behavior changed. Website traffic across North America was relatively consistent with normal spring behavior. But what changed drastically was conversion rate, which is a signal of consumer intent. They weren't just going to websites in order to browse around and then visit the store to make a purchase. They started buying. And so in March, really that, we were already trending up, at that second half of the month, ended up putting March up 24% for online sales. But then everything just accelerated into April. And with one day left, we're up, our platform is up over 1,000%. And we are literally emptying the channel of bikes under $1,000. The best way that I can describe what's happening is the retailer's cash register has shifted online. So 70% of all the transactions have been for local pickup. And as Kristin mentioned, curbside has been the most popular form. But the way that consumers are browsing the inventory and closing the transaction is all happening online. So some of these numbers will retreat as more people are able to visit stores. But I certainly, if in February, web sales represented less than 5% of total revenue for many of our customers. Over the last 6 weeks, it's represented 50 to 100%. I think we're currently assuming that as things start to normalize, that will retreat down to the 20 to 50%. But I don't expect we'll ever see 5% again.
Wow, that's fascinating. And obviously what we're showing here is again, more light on consumer behavior, especially how they're reacting to a seasonal change, frankly. And you're right, this hit at such an interesting time, and it really went in a direction I don't think anybody was really prepared for. But the big takeaway there is, again, on the browser and buying on the browser. So Ben, I'd love to shift the focus over to Quivers and your try and get your take on basically consumer expectations evolving when it comes to a new bar being set for what we used to call a frictionless research and shopping experience. So that was always an aspiration, right? Especially in the specialty markets, because we just don't have the deep pockets of, say, the Amazon marketplace, the Nordstroms, or the Targets, the ones that are really training the consumer on a day-to-day basis. But let's talk about our specialty markets. What lens do you look at the change in terms of how and what frictionless will mean today to this consumer?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's just address the major thing right off the bat is consumer expectations are exceptionally high, right? Kind of like I alluded to before, maybe too high. Some might think, but it is what it is. There's almost an entitlement to it. They want to buy when, where, and how they want to buy. They don't have a lot of concern for your process and your operational confinements. You can say, we're not a deep-pocketed, retailer, brand like these big people, but I'm really not sure that consumers make those distinctions. Like in the data we're seeing, they want fast shipping. They want to be able to purchase directly from the brand website. Then they want easy returns. They want return in store. They want to buy online, pickup in store. They want all these options. And they're not necessarily rationally thinking like, oh, this brand or this has the operational capacity to give me that. They just know that's what they want. That kind of goes back to like the training we had from there. And the way we're seeing that play out, right, is if you look at the numbers on our internal data and also what's out in the market, it seems like brand loyalty is kind of at a low right now, and brand fluidity, if you will, is high, right? I mean, in the past, if you were a legacy brand, you know, in our market with our customers, you've got some great ski manufacturer, you know, who was born on some ski hill back in 18, whenever, you know, the brand equity and all that, like that kind of creates a bit of an ego. Like, you know, if a consumer creates an out of stock or there's a high friction to get my product, they'll wait for it, right? They want us so much more than the rest. We are so incredibly special. You know, our relationship with our particular customers means they're going to wait and they're going to come to me and they're going to buy when it's ready to buy, or however it is that I sell it. But I'm just not sure you see that these days. All the various data points I see point in the opposite direction, that you know, consumers increasingly abandon brands for friction. Right? When you talk to them, you focus groups, some of the two things they complain most about is buying friction on the purchase and fulfillment process, right? How easy it is to transact and make that purchase right then and there when I want it, and then what are the fulfillment options? Is it going to get to me the when and the way that I want it? And when they don't, you know, have that, you know, there's a high turnover of them abandoning the brand and going and buying a competing product instead. And to those brands, that seems a little like, oh my gosh, I mean, if you're Patagonia, you don't imagine that your puffy jacket has anything in common with North Face's puffy jacket, right? In your mind, ours is so much better, ours is so much different. I think there was a time where some consumer loyalists thought that, but I think it's just the tribal mentality is eroding, right? There's less consumers that really think that way. They might love Patagonia to death, but when you have friction and you have problems with fulfillment, you know, you don't have fulfillment excellence, it's really changing their mind. It doesn't take much for them to go, that North Face jacket isn't so bad after all.
Interesting. Ryan, do you want to weigh in on that in terms of what consumers will be intolerant of from any brand going forward, or any other insights you have when it comes to obstacles for researching and acquiring goods?
Mm-hmm. First, I think Ben's exactly right on kind of shifts in brand preferences. I will say that in the last 6 weeks, what it appears happened is consumers did flock to trusted brands, whether that be a bike brand like a Trek Specialized, Cannondale, or Giant, or some of the most trusted retail brands in a market, or so like local retailers. But I'd say generally, and most of our customers would agree, that the brand partners that they carry are truly partners and exceptional. But there's most consumers don't walk through the door looking for a specific product as much as they used to. Broadly speaking, we try to avoid looking at the consumer as a monolith, you know, because you can generally describe, you know, kind of trends in their behavior. But I think Ben also said that, you know, the consumer doesn't see channels the same way that we do. And so I'd say generally consumers they start their journey either they know they want a product, you know, so I'll use an iPhone as an example. They know they want that iPhone, and then it's really up to them. Do they learn about it on Apple's website? Do they buy it there? Do they visit the Apple store? Do they visit Best Buy? Do they visit their cell phone carrier? Many other consumers don't necessarily have that brand preference, but they may have a retail establishment, whether that be a website or a physical retailer that they prefer, and they'll walk in the door and either just because of availability or a recommendation, they'll choose a product because of it. And I just think that we need to, you know, kind of be inclusive of all of that, and then really try to leverage the power of technology to make sure that where a product sits isn't going to have a negative impact on a consumer's willingness to buy it. So through kind of connectivity, making sure that no matter where a consumer is shopping, they can they can get their hands on the product in a predictable timeline.
Right. Okay. And we have obviously a lot more to go into on that front with actionable strategy. So just stay tuned for that. But right now we're going to basically dive into one of the key anchors of this process. So the online research process, which is the brand or the retail website. And so I'd love to talk with you, Ben, if you can kick us off on this topic, if you could talk about the data that you're seeing at Quivers that really shows how consumers are interacting with brand versus and retailer-owned websites today. I'd love to hear some of the key updates that specialty business-owned websites should have in place to meet the expectations of our consumer today.
Yeah, well, again, let me start on the big macro level, because that's a pretty interesting question. I think it comes in two parts. On the one hand, obviously, what we just referred to the beginning, at the beginning, is the consumer spending is very much being pushed online, right? I mean, the transactions are happening. E-com is booming at Black Friday or Cyber Monday levels or above across a number of industries. We're seeing soaring same-store sales for a number of our customers, for their online e-commerce marketplaces. But I want to point out, because this is something we've talked a lot about internally, because what everyone wants to know, right, is what's going to happen next. I think we kind of alluded to that in the beginning. Will this wear off? Will it drop off? I think Ryan mentioned it's something you're not expecting it to come back to 5% levels for bikes. There was actually a historical antecedent for this with SARS in China in 2000. I was looking at an analyst that had done some research on that, right? And there was a major shift that was very similar in their area at the time. I forget what the penetration was. I think e-commerce was like 16% or something like that. And with SARS, it bumped that dramatically. Like a huge amount of physical retail moved into e-commerce. And while it did come down a little bit, those new behaviors very much stuck. And those e-commerce levels did not return to normal. They did set a new baseline. So I think right now, don't quote me on this, I think in the US e-commerce is 8%, something like that, as of like 2017. It was expected to grow, to 16 or 30-something% in by 2023, something like that. I would expect with that new baseline and some of these new trends sticking, you'd expect to see the shift to e-commerce, the rate of that increase and it not, return to similar levels. So I think that is a new normal that everyone has to deal with. So if you're, that gets into my second part of the question, answer, I guess, is one of the trends we're seeing is, when you talk about, brand-owned websites, retailer-owned websites, it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about, manufacturers and needing to be excellent at selling. Even in the terminology, when you look at something called a manufacturer, I think that belies their attitude about their business, right? I make something, I don't sell something. If you're a brand or supplier and you really are relying on just pushing all of your product out to the wholesale channel and washing your hands of it, you don't have control, you put it out and that essentially gets sold for you, as opposed to selling direct on your own website and having a serious e-commerce play. Even pre-COVID, I think that was an increasingly antiquated way of doing business. And post-COVID, I'm just not sure that you can be left out of that. Certain brands are going to die on that hill. And just, for what it's worth, never get into e-commerce. But I think we're going to see that more and more. But to Ryan's point, this is not at all to say one is better than the other, that these need to be at odds. Like, the purpose of our whole software that we built was so that these can integrate and work together. So brands need to be able to own the selling part of the process and sell D2C, to brands, and their products need to be available to buy on their home website. But there's various technologies that can plug you into the retailers that works in everybody's favor. What Ryan was saying about the transaction being different, we call it like decoupling the transaction from the fulfillment. So if someone wants to buy online, we can actually push orders out, that online order, we can push it to the retailer and it can fulfill off the retailer shelf. So if a brand wants to take an order, transact, take the money online, and then have the customer pick it up on the curb, he can do that. If the brand wants to transact and buy it online and the retailer wants to take it off their shelf and fulfill it out and mail it the last mile to the customer, they can do that. And it's a win-win-win. The consumer gets whatever experience it is they want. And on the back end, the systems work together between the brand and retailer, and the money gets split and everybody's happy. So I think, people having that mindset of what their website is for and why, it goes far beyond just having like an educational website, on the brand side. And then on the retail side, it's not something we're doing ourselves, but a close tech partner of us, they've actually been very busy spinning up e-com websites for independent specialty retailers. Because even them, these guys, they're realizing, even if it's not a huge, segment of their business, that's a place they need to be, and they need to have that available. So, they're spinning up e-commerce sites for their individual retail shops so consumers can find them there, transact there, then come pick up in store. This company I'm talking about actually offers tech that does endless aisle. So that even extends it kind of what we're doing, but backwards, where if a consumer goes to a retail website of their local retailer whom they love, and they want a product, but it's not in stock on that retail shelf, the retailer plugs into the brand's warehouse, shows it in stock, the person buys it from the retail e-commerce site right there, and it just ships out from the brand itself. So it's basically endless aisle. And some retailers are absolutely eating that up. They love it, right? It works in their favor.
Well, I have somebody who can speak to that. Ryan's business is SmartEtailing, and that's essentially exactly your blueprint for bikes. So why don't you give us a little background on that and how you've seen the retailers respond, and maybe some of the things that you've seen change year over year that you don't think they're going to need to stop doing anytime soon.
Yeah, in bike, the most sophisticated operators, recognized years ago that having a digital presence was important, and have been steadily investing. SmartEtailing was founded in 1999, and I think we were lucky to be early in the game, and it has very similar functionality to what Ben described, which has become increasingly important because any physical retailer, no matter how large, they just have limitations on how much inventory they can carry. But if they're committed to a high quality brand, inevitably they want to be able to sell deeper into the SKU assortment that brand has. Yeah. And so the service we call supplier sync is exactly what Ben was describing, where the retailer can sell out of the supplier's inventory. And that's just becoming increasingly important as consumers do have that expectation of having a really broad selection, being fairly unforgiving about the fact that the retailer can only stock so much. And then retailers, appreciate it because it opens up new options for them to reduce their physical footprint or change the makeup of their stocking strategies in order to use the technology to sell more. And that's really how we come at this challenge. We start with the retailer, and their website presence is kind of the anchor to our business, and making sure that they have a future that's more than just a kind of a fulfillment endpoint, but that they're a full omni-channel partner for the brands that they work with, and that they're capable of being as competitive online as a brand is. And then on the flip side of that, we have a product locating technology so that a consumer on the brand website has a choice. So it is very common in bike now for that buy button to be on a brand's website, but oftentimes adjacent to that or sometimes interwoven with that is the option for the consumer to either redirect from the brand website to the retailer's website to buy, or through integration, the consumer being able to buy from the brand's website but off of the retailer's sales floor. So this integration is just a continuous process. It's only going to get faster. All parts of the channel are going to depend on it more, because the likelihood of having the right product at the right place at the right time for each buyer, it diminishes with SKU proliferation, and technology can help bridge that gap.
That's awesome. I'm so grateful we have both of you on. You're really great resources for all of this conversation. So at the end of Q4 2019, and I believe into the beginning of this year, we saw a lot of consumer trends pointing to a growing expectation of online and physical channels offering a very similar experience, which is exactly what both of you are speaking to. The more similarities and conveniences there were, the better, specifically regarding choice, personalization even. But really, it's, again, what Amazon's been all training us to expect, which is just immediacy, access to a number of, choice, the most choice, and best price, obviously, all of that. So if we're looking at the dual forces of COVID-19 and a recession, what should our audience be considering in terms of steps that they should be taking to show up in this research and purchase journey? So one example of that, I think, could be, if I could ask you, Ryan, what have you seen maybe some some of your retailers and brands doing not to the best of their ability? Like maybe they were like, oh, this is good enough for now. And now you're saying, you know what, this is table stakes. Like you have to do this now. So if we could maybe start with that, and then Ben, you can chime in when Ryan's done, that would be awesome. Thanks.
Cool. So sure. So first, with like what I love about our customer base is, so in bike, it's labeled the IBD, independent bicycle dealer, and that independent part at the beginning is really important in our space because it creates a lot of diversity at retail. And so I try to be really careful to not tell retailers that there's a right or a wrong way of doing it, because who am I to say what works? We think in terms of micro markets. A retailer on the north side of the street has a different market than the retailer on the south side of the street. And but on the whole, what's the most successful retailers in the country have done over the last few years is to invest in digital capabilities, even if it's a passive resource. Some of the biggest retailers in the country do not have very active marketing campaigns, but just the accessibility of the product through search and discovery, creates sales lift on its own. Now, the real winners over the last 7 or 8 years have been the retailers that have invested in Google Shopping, especially on the parts and accessories side of the business, and increasingly more on bike as well. So the retailers who kind of combine the capabilities of their web platform with a proactive and purposeful digital marketing plan, they're the ones that are winning the most. But certainly the whole channel is recognizing the importance of a website now. People are really kind of flocking to services like ours. And it is most, the word accessibility and technology right now tends to be more geared towards ADA compliance. But I think it's important to look at it in terms of how accessible is your business or your inventory. And I think with the restrictions that have been put on public life lately, a retailer who is 100% dependent on a physical transaction is really at a disadvantage moving forward.
My understanding of the way Quivers works, and please correct me on this, but essentially, as you said earlier, Ben, it's almost like the brand website, there's a buy now button, and it goes out to a number of retailers that are, enjoined in this process on Quivers. Maybe that's where we start, because ultimately, isn't it sort of like a timed segment, almost like a queue where it moves from one to the next? Can you explain that, and maybe how you've seen that process evolve in terms of what you're offering right now?
Yeah, again, at the high level, I think for us, it is connecting the two experiences. When you say that stat you mentioned about the online offline needing to be similar, I don't know where the stat came from. Similar is an interesting word for me. It's not that they have to be the same, right? That may be a little too literal in my mind, but the idea that they need to be integrated and seamless and have from the consumer standpoint, that it doesn't seem like two different operations. I mean, I personally, anecdotally, had consumer experiences where a brand site told me something about a return with fulfillment. I showed up in store, and the store had no idea what they were talking about, right? They were like, I have no idea why the brand had that on that website, or why you could say you could come here to do that. So those are the consumer experiences that go very badly, right? Is when the online and offline worlds just are not, talking to one another. It's like they both have their own agendas. So I think that's an issue. In terms of what we do, how we solve that is, for brands that are selling online, a lot of times that can be competitive with your retail channel. Like, we really believe very wholeheartedly, the whole reason our company started is that they don't need to be at odds. The more physical retail and online e-commerce work together, the better everybody wins between those two entities and the consumer. So we made the software such that, brands can sell online, and they would typically experience what we call channel conflict, right? I mean, your retail network, your special independent dealers, your big box retailers, they would all kind of give pushback, feel like you're cannibalizing their sales to a degree. So we developed this process that, like, you could sell online and then fulfillment, basically fulfillment agnostic. If a brand wants to set it where, and I went into earlier about why brands need to be selling online, right? I take that as a priori idea here that, like, people come to your brand website ready to purchase, right? That they just do. We can go into that as an aside. But so they're there, they're ready to purchase, you do the transaction. Now they don't really care where it comes from, right? They just want to have it the way they want to get it. They either want it to show up immediately at their house if they want shipping. Another segment of the population doesn't want to pay for shipping and wants to go pick it up. So you have those things available. So from the brand's perspective, they can set certain product lines. They can have certain rules around it where they fulfill out of their own warehouse and just ship direct to the consumers. They also can port out a number of their orders instantly out to those brands, and those brands, based on the inventory they have, fulfill it out. In terms of the technicals you were talking about with the queue and that sort of thing, that's evolved for us over the years. So we started with a very simplistic model where we kind of ping out, a round robin queue, and they would use an app, a retail store owner would use an app to say, confirm it and say, oh yeah, I have it, right? And then that order would finish. And if no one did it, it would go on to the next retailer. We've got far more advanced than that by now. Now we have ways of ingesting the inventory of those retailers. So if retailers give us the inventory information, they can share it with the back with the brand, and that enables a lot of more very interesting kind of tech-enabled things. One, it makes that process seamless. Like we've gotten to the point where we're cutting down fulfillment times for these brands who were already selling online, but then do this distributed fulfillment. We're actually fulfilling faster locally because we ping it out to a local dealer who lives much closer to the consumer where they took place. The dealers already put their inventory in, so we know they have it. They don't have to confirm anything. It just gets sent as an already confirmed right to the retailer and says, hey, you're on deck to fulfill this. Their system automatically accepts it. They pick it and they have it in the truck and off the dock in absolutely no time. Like our times going from order confirmation to shipping confirmation to like actual delivery. You can check out some of our case studies. We're cutting times for some major brands in pretty significant ways. I mean, we've reduced brands that have had an average delivery time of like 7 days down to like 2 days on average.
That's awesome. It's really, really cool to hear how that's evolved, and thank you for sharing that. So is the retailer uploading the inventory, I think historically may have been a little bit of a challenge. Is that something that's not a problem anymore?
No, I mean, we've left that in there because, I mean, come on, we're not biased against retailers, right? I mean, we love the small to the big. So if you're keeping your inventory on pen and paper, you can literally, we can scan it and take it in. A lot of people are still keeping it in a flat file, so you can upload a flat file, and we've made that process as frictionless as possible. If they want to get to the point where they kind of work on their tech stack, so they've got something where they're keeping their inventory in their ERP or whatever it might be, and use an API to pull that to us, we can do that as well. So basically just kind of made it like as easy as possible to get your inventory into the system as quickly as possible. Because it really benefits both. I mean, so the retailers, because one of the things on the retail side, they hated missing out on fulfillment. Retailers love this. It's just like basically like free sales for them, right? The brands are helping them move product off shelves. So with them, they would try and accept a round robin order, and they would miss it, right? They would respond in time, so it would move on, and someone else would get it. So they learn that if they uploaded their inventory, as soon as it gets shipped out and they have it in stock, it's auto accepted, right? So they stop missing out on fulfillment of orders that they wanted to fulfill for. And on the brand side, having all that inventory availability, they basically get, it's like you would with corporate stores, right? But with your independent dealer, they suddenly get a view, an inventory view, across this dealer network, across the country, right? Which enables them to do, a ton of things, as you can imagine.
That's great. Ryan, did you have anything you wanted to add on that? Because that, to me, I think is a very concrete step that to both of you may sound like a no-brainer. But again, we're talking about prioritizing and up-leveling our companies so that we're ready to serve this consumer. And obviously, brands' websites have much broader reach. So that's another way to tap into a much broader reach for your retail region. So I don't know, Ryan, if you have anything you wanted to follow up with before we head over to the next topic.
I'll just reiterate what Ben said. I think that the retailers on the whole have really come to appreciate that if they can provide some transparency into their inventory to their brand partners, if those brand partners will help them sell a product. That's been much more widely accepted over the last 3 to 5 years. There definitely was a sense amongst retailers in bike prior to that brands would take advantage of that visibility, and that seems to have really fallen to the wayside.
That's good. And then also, I know operationally speaking, it is important for the retailer to actually have their ducks in a row, so to speak, in terms of how to integrate with this with your staff and, to make it seamless and make it quick for that consumer, because you could have all the tech in place as you possibly can imagine, but if that human touch or that human process isn't in place, the whole thing will burn to the ground. So that's another thing that is really important to get in place. And to add to that, we're going to talk about buy online, pick up in store, and curbside pickup. And I have some things to add in after we talk about some of the blocking and tackling on this and the trends around it that would be helpful, I think, to set a process, and evolving process really in terms of how to truly recruit and enroll consumers who are coming to your store to pick up something in the future. So, but we're going to start with the brass tacks. Let's get into buy online, pick up in store. I mean, Ryan, when you and I talked, I think it was Q3, the end of Q3, we did a show on kind of what holiday 2019 was going to look like. It seems like years ago, but that was only a couple months ago. But we talked about just the crazy, hockey stick growth of buy online, pick up in store. Obviously, curbside is another facet to that. But can you give a little bit of background in terms of like how you've seen that evolve even pre-COVID? Because I do think it also really speaks to that consumer really being in an expectation mindset around this. And now that I feel like we've seen the clutch drop and speed this along like 3 years in what's happened since the COVID and the recession has hit. So let's talk about what you've been seeing prior to holiday through holiday, and we'll get into kind of the speed with which it's evolving today.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. Historically with our platform, retailers and bike always preferred what we now call click and collect, because their preference was to sell the inventory that they had in stock. And many small businesses didn't really want to be in what they traditionally viewed as the e-commerce business. They didn't really want to pick, pack, and ship a product. And so they would try to steer as many customers towards click and collect as possible. But really over the last 2 years, it started to become more clear that large retailers like Target and Walmart were leveraging that distributed inventory that they had paired with good technology to connect buyers with the product that was closest to them. And they were really leveraging that as a competitive advantage against Amazon. And retailers really, started to kind of understand exactly what that meant for their smaller businesses. And so we saw click and collect steadily rise over the last 2 years. It averaged 40% of orders throughout 2019, with peaks above 50% in August, which is prime bike season, and then around the holiday season, obviously. And then it's continued to today. And as I shared earlier, I don't think it's gonna retreat much.
Right. It's not going anywhere, especially with Starbucks and other day-to-day essentials for us as COVID consumers, obviously now navigating a recession. But we've seen, I think these stores were coming online for Starbucks right around holiday, where they would have order online and then curbside pickup, if you will, where basically you still had the barista human touch, but everything was done digitally. So it was a nice melding of tech and human. Again, people were starting to see that, I think. And now that we've gone through, we are going through COVID-19, we're seeing a lot of businesses really, really bolster, such as pharmacy or lots of other, groceries, the biggest driver, I would think. But let's talk about this. Let's talk about kind of bumping up our game from just basic blocking and tackling on this to what we need to do to be exceptional or specialty. This literally will evolve what specialty is. And as our guests here have said, the consumer may be less loyal to brands, but I think the more we can prove trust with great experiences and reliability on these topics, the more we can actually bring them back in to belong to us again. So Ben, I would sure love to hear what you're seeing in terms of really strong success stories with curbside pickup or buy online, pick up in store. We need every single thing you have.
Yeah, mine might be a kind of answer. Because first of all, I think buy online, pick up in store, again, from my perspective, is always a bit lighter. It's one point of a larger piece of the puzzle, right? Whether you're buying online, picking up in store, whether it's buying online and fulfilling from the store, whether it's buying online, return to store, these are all points of what I see is fulfillment as a differentiator. Like, I think you got to get the bigger mindset here. If you want to be excellent and you want to really, be amazing at buy online, pick up in store, is make it a part of your, fulfillment excellence process. down at that level, do you need it? Well, do I need the one? Do I need all of them? Personally, I think you need all of them, but buy online, pick up in store, certainly in the near term with the certain environment we have now, yeah, you absolutely need it. But there's another reason you need it, right? And that is based on consumer behavior. So COVID means you absolutely need it, probably amongst the other various fulfillment options. It's something you need to be doing now because of COVID, and that's not going to go away for a while. But a broader trend around shoppers, there's a lot of data that shows, well, a lot of shoppers really do want to buy something and have it delivered, right? Most shoppers prefer to do it that way. I think it's definitely over the majority. We can argue about how much, 60, 70, 80, but a lot of people want to have stuff delivered to their home these days. However, there's a huge caveat to that. With items, right, that have a high cost of shipping, that's a major, major hurdle. All those people that wanted things delivered to their house, they actually have a low threshold for shipping costs. So unless you can eat the shipping costs, if you've got shipping costs, once they get over like, $15, $30, the preference massively shifts to pick up in store, right? All the way across the board. Once you're incurring those shipping costs, they'll either abandon the sale, and if you don't have pickup in store, you probably will lose the sale. If you have pickup in store, they move to that option instead. And then the last one that we see with our brands and retailers is there's just verticals, and bikes is a perfect example for that can just be a bit awkward to ship, right? I mean, if a dealer, ships it originally, from their warehouse, they can assemble it all, put it in a box, and then ship it out. Sometimes some high overhead for that. But with our model of, with bike shops, we tend to lean more towards pickup in store than fulfillment out the back door. Because if there are orders placed online for parts, and buy online, pick up a store, again, it really breaks down by product. If you want me to go down to the store and go to the curb to pick up some bike gloves and a helmet and some new pedals, come on, right? Like, you're putting me through the ringer here. Like, I don't need to do that. Send the bike handle grips to my house. I'll put them on myself. But if I ordered a new bike online, right, and I got to go down and the local store has to pick that, a lot of times they assemble it to put it on display. If they've got to disassemble it, put it back in the box, they may not have the original box if the brand sent it to them. So they got to have some sort of boxing capabilities, put it out on a last mile truck and get it to the store. That can be really tedious. Like that, deliver locally. Is not always, that distributed fulfillment is not always a perfect scenario given the nature of that product. So with a lot of our bike brands, some of them still do it. They are just very advanced. We've got a couple of bike brands on the platform, bike manufacturers, the retailers who fulfill for us. They do pick and repack, which is, it's a high overhead for them. But I think they do more business in pickup in store, and most of what they just fulfill out the door and ship to the consumer from the retail shelves or the bike accessories.
Okay, that's awesome. So we're talking about micro fulfillment here, which is a pretty big trend that's been brewing for a while. And I think it's a great one for us to consider. I absolutely love the way you put that, Ben, in terms of making this just part of what we do, part of our fulfillment strategy going forward, because ultimately, as you said at the beginning, we have to be where the consumer needs us and wants us to be. And we have to be willing to bend over backward. So I would love to kind of hear more bike perspective on that, because again, it does have an awkward, there's, let's face it, there's an awkward component to it, but we're also getting a lot of data right now because we're shipping a lot of sub $1,000 bikes to people who probably don't know how to put them together. So give us any insight you have on this.
So what we're seeing is a lot of local home delivery, and all of, Ben hit the nail on the head in terms of the complexities of a bicycle. Both the cumbersome nature of getting it professionally assembled and delivered, but then also even there's really just a subset of the bike consumer who would be capable of even putting on a disc brake caliper or something like that. So that local home delivery is a key component in the IBD channel right now. You do see some brands who have temporarily lifted some restrictions on allowing local retailers to ship pre-built bikes. This will be an interesting test period to see whether the volume was meaningful, if the customer experience was good, and if obviously if liability isn't increased in a meaningful way. And Kristin, you and I have talked about kind of Canyon, who is for those of you who aren't in bike, is a pretty powerful brand in Europe, especially, who's come to the U.S. in the last couple of years with a direct-to-consumer model. And I think they've really paved the way on kind of the capabilities of a manufacturer to put a built bike in a box that virtually any consumer could put together. So, the rules are changing. I think that anybody in bike retail should assume that at some point in the future, any major manufacturer is going to have the capability to ship directly to a consumer. And then it's really their choice in terms of what the timeline is or how margin is shared and that sort of thing. Kristin, you said earlier, if you don't mind, around kind of the experience, and that's really what we're seeing now is with this rapid shift to online buying. The retailers have been challenged to shift their customer service staff away from the traditional kind of greet somebody within 20 feet or 20 seconds. And now it's much more phone, live chat, and email customer service. And that makes all the difference in the world in terms of both operational strain, because if the retailer is not able to stay on top of order management, communicate proactively in a transparent way, then they end up doing double work because their phone is ringing and they're having to answer questions for customers that if they'd been one step ahead, the phone never would have rung. And then on the flip side, does that customer show up to the curb frustrated, or do they show up pleased and they're going to tell their friends about it? So regardless of where the sale closes, to Ben's point around if it's fulfilled at retail or even if a supplier fulfills it, customer service is just absolutely essential. Those rules have not really changed.
Right. And that is at our DNA. So again, I personally, and again, I realize both of you have great insight into just, the whole loyalty issue. I mean, as specialty brands, I think we've worked really hard to build relationships. On the marketing side, that's content, it's nurturing. Like, I do think we still have to continue that, just because the trend right now is showing people are jumping from brands, from friction. I do think that things will settle and they'll be emotionally available to us again, I hope. I do realize that's a little bit of a crystal ball, but again, that's why a lot of us on this town hall got into the business. Is we love working with people, we love showing them experiences. Part of what we're showing them now is how exceptional we can be at convenience, and how getting them out and enjoying what they need to do is easier than ever. That will become part of what we're looked to, even though it has a tech element to it. The more we marry humanization with that tech, I think the more a winning equation will emerge in the future, I hope. And with that, it's kind of our last question. It's a great one to end on, and then we have time to get into some questions here. But I'd love to have each of you, or one of you, whoever, like if you want to chime in, both of you, I'd love to just get your take on how digital connectivity between brands and retailers will be evolving in the next few months, because that's right when winter sports going to be kicking into high gear.
Ben, I have a feeling our answers will be similar, but do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. In terms of the way they integrate together, I can get into all the tech stuff in a second. But I think just what you said earlier, one thing I want to touch on about, all the things happening, the various options they're fulfillment in store. One thing I want to point out that we haven't talked about enough that I think is super, super important is when we kind of brushed over the decoupling of the transaction from that fulfillment process. The one thing I think that you're going to see people get away from, because it is a very negative customer experience and it's something that I just does not benefit brands in a lot of ways, is the idea that you go on that website and that you get rerouted to a store, without a purchase taking place prior. So like buy online, pick up in store. The reason that works is because the transaction took place before you went out there. The old school way of like you go to a store, maybe you browse some product, a brand website, you browse some product, you see something you want, and then you hit those old dealer locator buttons that go, oh, here's a Google map of some stores around you. Good luck, go find it, right? You send them out on a wild goose chase to get there. Maybe the most advanced dealer locators actually pull some inventory and confirm that the inventory, is there in the local store and they have it. Our data shows that when you come off that, when you send someone off your website and they go down there, they were on your brand, they had intent to buy, right? There's not a bunch of other competing products lined up on your site. They're there, they're thinking about your products. They only have your products. The second they go off site to an e-tailer, to a backcountry, they go into a retailer, your product is racked up against an assortment of other products. That's literally the retailer's job, right? And that's no knock to retailers. They are doing their job. But we've seen like up to a 50% drop off that like when you send them off there in store, right, and the purchase didn't get captured there on site ahead of time, and you send them in there to browse, half the time they're going to end end up taking another product. So I think that's just another way that, and I think in the past that could be an animosity issue, but I think now it's a cooperation and collaboration issue, right? Like, let's get that transaction happening wherever it is, whether it's on the site of an e-tail site of a retail shop, the brand site. Let's get that transaction done. Let's get the consumer what paid for what they want, and then let's then fulfill and get it to them however that needs to happen.
Thank you. That was awesome.
Yeah, I think, Ben nailed it. I think the only, especially on the point of, just traditional dealer locator is virtually worthless at this point. The only people using that are companies trying to sell things to brands or try to glean contact lists from brand websites.
Start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of to Ben's point, like, I'd say product locator is a more valuable feature. The retailer happens to have the product that the consumer is looking for. And he's also exactly right that you're going to have a drop off in conversion rate, for the brand's product when you refer off site. I tend to think that I like to avoid all or nothing decisions. So it would be very reasonable for a brand to say, I don't want to direct any traffic off the site. If I've got a consumer at the bottom of my conversion funnel, I want to capture that sale right now and precisely the way that Ben described, and try to include the local retailer in that process as best as possible. But every consumer is different, every brand is different, and so it's still a very viable strategy to redirect a consumer. But if you're going to do that, I'd use a sophisticated solution. You don't want to redirect a consumer to a retailer's homepage, for example, where they have to stop the shopping journey again. You want to send them right to the product detail page, and you want them to be one click away from buying the product. Kristin, and then to kind of moving forward, I think it's just becoming crystal clear. The majority of retailers are going to need to have a digital presence. And so I think you're going to see a lot of retailers jump in, set aside some of their, a lot of retailers made decisions 10 years ago about e-commerce, and they're going to revisit those decisions. They may set aside, kind of expectations of having the perfect e-commerce website to take on the nationwide players, and understand that it is a cash register online, and I need to get capability first and refine style and brand presence over time. And then with suppliers, there's integrate, find a partner, find multiple partners, but build that connectivity out, because the consumer is, wherever the consumer is, you want them to, in an approved way, and you want to maintain channel integrity as best you can. But if somebody is an approved distribution partner for you, you want to have that two-way inventory flow, and ideally a way to kind of manage orders together.
It really improves trust on every touch point. So I think that this has been really, really helpful. And obviously
can I add to him, just because?
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
I love the way he ended it. And I think it's really ironic, because I'm going to say the same thing in the opposite way. I was going to end in the same way. He just said every retailer needs an e-com presence these days. That's absolutely true. And then I'm going to say that every brand, most every brand can benefit from a physical retail presence. So he's saying we need e-commerce, and I'm saying we need physical. Both of them need each other. But on my side, Rebecca, that going in that direction. There was a really good quote by a Harvard Business Review article lately that showed the data. They showed that any D2C brands that started dabbling in physical retail all had lower merchandise return rates and higher repeat purchases than their online counterparts, right? So just to show that having an integrated omni-channel experience is usually almost always better, is always better, than trying to go it alone in either way, right? If a physical retailer is not trying to get online, or a brand's not trying to sell online, or go to D2C and start to abandon their retail network, the two absolutely have to work together. And I think what Ryan said about the customer experience, the one thing I believe about retail is they absolutely own the experience, right? They're always going to own that, and that is absolutely never going to go away, right? I saw a quote that said that their prime function in retail will be the customer experience, part, that there's no bot or personalization bot or anything that's been invented online that's going to replace that great sales assistant, like the experience you have in store. They own the local, community interaction, there with consumers at that level. And I think that is absolutely valuable.
Yep. And that is one thing on the resource page that SIA has posted in some of the past town halls we've done, as well as some of the podcasts we've produced for SIA around COVID. There's a lot of information in there around just retailers and brands highlighting mission, vision, values, highlighting ethics a little bit more, telling a story that is humble, but, talks a little bit, currently about what's happening and how they're contributing in terms of the pandemic that we're in right now. And that is actually something that consumers are, not only are they actively, considering brands and retailers in terms of what's the easiest and most convenient, they're also aligning themselves. It won't be every, you can't be great to everyone, but the people who really resonate with your shop or your brand will see what you're doing and they'll want to raise their hand and be a part of your community. And again, we're in an evolution. They may come out and go back in, but they have to have that two-way conversation with you, both on the retailer and the brand side. So that's something else that we have a lot of information in past, very previous, but podcasts that have come out prior to this town hall. So thank you so much to both of you. Let's get some questions in here because we have a lot of questions. And I'll also just say to everybody, if we don't get your question, if it is a question that wasn't addressed by a question that we did get, we will be answering your questions probably in a follow-up email of some kind. So just know that we will answer all the questions. So with that, we actually have, I'm opening the chat first, then I'll go to the questions. And it looks like we have one from Mike Hattrup, who is kind of a celebrity. Great to hear from you, Mike. And he says, Ben said that every brand needs a physical retail presence. Is he saying brands should have their own stores or partner with brick and mortar retailers? Great question, Mike.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I'm agnostic about it. I think that the independent retailers provide a bit of flexibility. I was actually talking with the president of a major skiing manufacturer. No, I don't like to call it manufacturers, a major ski brand. And he had a really interesting perspective on that. Like, while corporate stores are certainly good, it gives you a large amount of brand control over what happens there and the experience in store and the fulfillment process through those stores. He kind of saw specialty retailer, especially retail shops and retail networks, his relationships with that need to be deeper in the future, that they need to be more intertwined so they're closer to being like corporate shops. But the independent, like he just talked about in the independent bike dealers, is one that creates a lot of creativity and individual mindedness that you need out there in your retail shop that's going to react to local consumer situations that you just might not be able to do if you're doing top-down corporate stores. And you can move in and out of relationships with them. I mean, obviously you want to have relationships that last and test the test of time, but sometimes business situations do change. So I think, brands can kind of almost have, it's almost virtual corporate stores where you kind of spin up and spin down in regions, that you've got demand for. You can spin up and start working with a very select group of amazing stores who are committed to the type of experience and excellence that you want as a brand, and those are your guys, right? One of the things we always talk is you don't need a million stores these days. Like, you don't need a huge retail network. You need the right retail network. So while for most of our customers, corporate stores have a place, that's usually actually the actual volume of corporate stores is decreasing, right? You're seeing that kind of correction away from that. It may be a decrease in the total amount of retail stores, but a much increased commitment to the retail channel with very select stores.
And I think that's only going to accelerate because who knows how we're going to all get through this. And I think, again, we're going to see consumer evolution continue as well. Ryan, did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or should I go to the next question?
Ben just said something briefly around kind of the vibrancy and drive of an entrepreneur and kind of what that gives for solving challenges at the local level. And I'll never underestimate the power of entrepreneurs. And then just observing bike, bike brands tend to drive the conversation a lot. And there's really only been one brand that's succeeded at running branded stores. And so it's proven to be much, much harder, I think, than was anticipated.
Yeah, Agree. So I have a couple questions here from Jeff Harbo. So thanks so much for writing in, Jeff. One of the questions is really interesting. And I think, Ryan, this might be one you want to take, but it's obviously open for both of you because I'm going to make a Trek analogy. But he asks, does the retailer give up any margin to the brand since the brand is financing the inventory in terms of everything that we've been talking about here? Because I understand that when Trek first did their D2C, they actually were able to, direct consumers to a regional store, but they weren't able to sell their floored inventory. They had to pull from Trek's inventory, and there was like a lesser margin. So if you can talk about that a little bit, and has that evolved? Is that still the case? And of course, Ben, we need you to weigh in on this as well.
Yes, you're exactly right, Kristin. And each of the bike brands handles this a little bit differently, and have different capabilities. So some can sell directly off of a sales floor. Others do have to ship a bike in. And each one handles margin share or commission. They labeled it differently. My assumption is that's going to be just a factor in dealer agreements moving forward. What was the original question? I'm not sure if I totally caught it.
He asked if the retailer gives up any margin to the brand through this process.
Yeah. So I'd say that through our service. So if the retailer is the fulfillment mechanism for a sale that closes on the retailer's website, then the dealer gets full margin. They just sold it out of the supplier's stock. If now, on the other hand, the sale closes on the retailer's website and they use a drop ship program, then that drop ship program comes with a cost, which has proven to be an acceptable cost to most retailers because they don't have to carry the cost of the inventory or the operational burden of shipping the product. Then if the sale closes on the brand's website, which is where I started, it's a very dynamic environment right now that will likely evolve over time.
So that's a great question.
Yeah.
Ben, can you weigh in?
Yeah, it is. We actually try to solve this by just making it as fluid as possible. So we kind of make it where you can split it any way you want to. So with our model, like I said, for the most part, what's happening is the transactions taking place on the brand website. And then either the brand is fulfilling it through their warehouse direct, or they're pushing the order out and the retailer is fulfilling it. In a lot of cases, the customer is just leaving all the margin with the retailer, despite the fact that the product moved off their shelves. Sometimes they do a little split where the consumer can take a cut on that, but that literally just comes down to agreements. There's nothing set. Our platform does not try and push it one way or the other. Literally, we leave it entirely between agreements between the brand and retailers, and everybody slices it up their own way. And people seem to be pretty happy with that. I mean, that's the one thing they want, is it not to be forced in one way. Right?
Right.
So that they can work it out amongst themselves. I mean, for us, for the brands, what we see is that even if they don't, or even if they leave the margin with the retailer, what it ends up being is that the brand's website helps, sell through, right? And annual inventory turnover. And then they come back and buy more, from the reps and stock deeper, right? Maybe they expand the product catalog, on shelf, et cetera. And, the brand, makes that revenue in a deferred fashion. So it's actually usually not a point of contention.
Okay, great. All right. And then Jeff also has another question. He wants us to expand a little bit on the trend that we talked about from the Target earnings report of consumers wanting one stop. So obviously we're talking about Target, Costco, Walmart. He says that offer all of these things in one place. What does that mean for our specialty consumer? It's a great question.
I'll take it first, Ben. I think I'd say that in bike, consumers don't, again, just like they don't necessarily see channels, they don't necessarily care about dealer agreements. So they go to a bike store, they don't necessarily know that going to a Trek store means that they're unlikely to find the Specialized or something like that. So within there are certain brand restrictions in certain retailers that limit selection, exclusivities that limit selection, but especially when you get into the aftermarket space, with the diversity of distributors that are in the bike space, with technology platforms like SmartEtailing, a retailer has that endless aisle bin. I love that term that you used earlier, and so the consumer can put 5 items in their cart, and 2 of them are in stock at the store, and the remaining 2 ship from different distributors. And as long as there's good transparency and communication in terms of order notice email, order updates, and then shipment ready emails. If the consumer is well informed, there's certainly adequate resources to get a wide assortment to a single location.
Okay, great. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd almost disagree with the term a little bit, one stop. It's a little bit antiquated. Like, I mean, yeah, you need to go into a big box store like a Target and expect to get everything you want. Like, I'm not sure that's what that means in the industry these days. I think the way Ryan described it,
Oh, you just went on mute, Ben. I'm not sure how his audio went on mute.
Sorry, am I back?
That's okay. Yes, you are. Thank you. Sorry about that.
I was pointing out that, like what Ryan said, it's more like that. If you go into a bike shop and there's brand exclusivity and there's certain brands you can't get or something's out of stock, I saw some really good data from a couple of commerce platforms or consultants that did it. There's an extremely high expectation now these days on out of stocks like that if you're in store, you do expect the associate to just be able to push some buttons and boom, that order goes off and he's going to buy what he has in the store from you now. And the other thing he wanted that you don't have is going to come off a shelf somewhere else or some other site and show up at your house or show up at the store to pick up. Like they had a study of 90% of consumers ranked that as the #1 expectation that they had for local physical stores. And then when it's online, I don't think at all it needs to be one stop. It's not like I have to go to backcountry.com and expect everything to be there. I find that in this day and age, our data shows that people visit multiple brand sites, when making a purchase. Like they don't mind shopping around. Like the internet is the one-stop shop, right? Everything's on the internet. So an individual site doesn't have to have anything on it. That's kind of ridiculous. It doesn't apply in the digital world. What I definitely know happens there that they're very intolerant about, again, is out of stock. So if I'm on your brand website, it is kind of a micro one-stop where if I go there and I go through and I find that, a puffy jacket in navy, the right fill and the right size and everything that I want, and that happens to be out of stock, like, if you somehow your supply chain issues or something major in your factory happened, okay. But like, that's part of what our software is selling as well, is like, if you've pushed a lot of that out to your retail and you've kind of over retailed it out in Texas and they're not buying that many puffy jackets, but in Salt Lake, I'm here and I'm on your site and I want to buy it, but it sells out of stock, you better be able to get me that jacket, off of that Texas shelf and get it to my house in 2 days. The data shows that people are, literally it takes like 1 or 2 out of stocks from a major brand that they care a lot about before it really starts to erode like their trust in that brand and before they start shopping elsewhere. Like the most of the research did a lot of out of stock stuff first in the physical realm, but there's good new research, you can look it up, around out of stocks and the impact it has on brand equity in the digital realm. And it's really, it's getting bad. Like you do not want to have out of stocks too often. It's a little different if you're running some exclusive launch, something fancy, you partner with an influencer or whatever. That's intentional. But other than that, non-intentional out of stocks, that in terms of one stop, like I need to stop there, get it, and I need to not do anything else to get the size and product that I want.
That's very good feedback. Thank you. So Johnny McClellan has a question for both of you. If a retailer wants to start with Quivers or SmartEtailing, how do they start? Are they limited to suppliers who are already active on one of these platforms? How do retailers get their suppliers to support the effort? It's a great question.
Do you want to go first, Ben?
Yeah, sure. Ours is pretty simple. For the most part, in the verticals that we're already in, like outdoor and music and some of these others, we have a pretty good footprint across brands and retailers. So for the most part, either of those that come on usually find something that they work with. On the retail side, we find if you're a brand and you come on and you don't have the retailers you want, we found that's actually quite easy. I mean, most of these retailers really jump at the opportunity to be able to fulfill for a brand. I can fulfill for that brand out the back door and get most of that sale. Like, that's not a hard thing because they're usually immediately on board. For a brand that they want. On the other side, if you're a retailer and you want to come, help us, because we go out to brands and convince them to come get on the platform. We have a referral program that like retailers can band together and help and reach out through some of our referral materials to that brand and say, hey, in this region or my store, our stores, like we want to fulfill for you and we would love this tech option to do it. That helps put a little pressure on the brand to realize that there's demand there. Right, and that they could be doing it that way, so we just offer that for them.
And for SmartEtailing, so we are primarily in the bike space with an adjacent product for bike retailers that also do ski in the winter. And so for a bike retailer to sign up or really just start by learning more, because this needs to be an informed choice, just go to our website, smartetailing.com, and request a demo. We've got a great team. All we do is work with independent retailers, and we'll be very transparent and help make a good decision. In the bike space, agreed, we work with over 400 brands, 60,000 SKUs already pre-built in the application. So we go pretty deep, which isn't to say that we don't occasionally miss somebody. And in ski, we've tried to work with our existing retailers in order to see where the most demand is. And the ski industry responded really positively and got us a lot of product information to build up that catalog. But usually a phone call from a committed retailer to a brand, a national sales manager, a marketing director, that can usually get a conversation started because the data is usually there. Integrations often take a little more effort. No brand I've met has excess IT resources, and so that's more of a commodity.
That's very well put. So I have a question that kind of dovetails with this, and then we're going to go into something around the broader consumer. That's a great question. So Val Powell asks, how would a small retailer know what sorts of POS system they'd need to be able to integrate with brand inventories? I realize we're getting into the weeds here, but these are very important in terms of prioritization of investment and modernization. So she asks, or sorry, Val could be a he or a she, my apologies. Would all of the different brands work similarly? It all sounds like a huge investment of time and money for a small retailer. Any advice on where retailers should start to make themselves integratable? I realize, Ryan, you just addressed some of this, but I think this goes a little bit deeper.
Mm-hmm. Ben, I'll go first just for bike. In bike for retail, I think nearly 70% of POS or point of sale market share is between two providers, Ascend and Lightspeed, with kind of a distant number 3 of Microsoft RMS. So if you're on one of those platforms, there's a native integration with SmartEtailing. As long as you have a computerized point of sale that has the ability to transmit an inventory file, in an automated way nightly, and most point of sale files do have the ability to do what's called schedule a job. And it can be delivered via email or via an FTP. I'm getting into the weeds, but you need a digital point of sale. I mean, this is, you've got so much money tied up in inventory. If you're not using technology to manage that, you're causing long-term harm for your business. So as long as you're on a capable modern system, it should be able to integrate with us. And then from the supplier side, it's a little more of a detailed conversation.
Yeah, on our side, it's actually much the same for smaller retailers who are not terribly technologically advanced. There are a few of them. I'd like to say, there's one that would easily, jive with all brands and all softwares, but it is a bit of a long tail. People are using different systems. For the most part, we have a professional services department that helps integrate those together. We don't have a lot of trouble with that, honestly. And then even if you don't, like he said, if you have the ability to take out a flat file, right, whether you upload it, email it, into the system, honestly, it's a little bit more manual, and tedious. It's manual and tedious, but it's actually not terribly time consuming or expensive, right? So I would challenge her the idea that a small retailer, that it would be too expensive to do. It's just a step that needs to be taken regularly, right? Like he's talking about scheduling a nightly upload. That's nice if you can automate that. If not, someone needs to take a note and remember to upload, right? And we have retailers doing that to get in on the game. They're literally just remembering to upload a file each night. And that's the beauty about tech. Some really fancy stuff goes on, and then some really not fancy stuff goes on in the background. And that's, that's perfectly okay.
The sticky note integration technique, yeah. I'll add that, I think, the turn of phrase ROI is often overused. And I think when a retailer especially is looking at their subscription costs, those costs can ramp up really quickly. But for the sort of things that Ben and I are talking about, it is an investment and not a cost. You've got so much money tied up in inventory. If you make the right investments in technology, you put that inventory to work for you, and that's an investment in your business.
While we're in the weeds and you brought up ROI, I should point out, we have a SaaS model, but we're primarily transaction based. So for a retailer or for a retailer itself, it's basically there's no overhead to get involved. We'll take a small transaction fee out of the orders once they start coming through. And we've never had anyone where that transaction fee hit their margins so hard that like they didn't have ROI. All our customers are seeing it. We charge some implementation fees for the brands. We have a set list of plugins with e-commerce platforms like Magento and BigCommerce, WooCommerce, Shopify, and all of that. So those plugins are pretty cheap. If we have to build a custom plugin, if you have a custom made site that we have to kind of build a professional do that, it can go beyond 5K, but I mean, it's for most, medium-sized brand, it's very palatable and they end up paying for itself very quickly. But because it's the transaction model for us, it's fairly de-risking to start. So I don't want either brands or retailers to think that there's some huge upfront cost or SaaS subscription that you have to jump on to make some of this stuff happen.
I'm glad that you pointed that out because they are getting approached by a lot of them right now. And that whole marketing stack puzzle is something that is daunting, especially with a skeleton crew working at your brand or your store. So
I'm very
really
sensitive
appreciate
to that. I worked at an agency in a past life where we did a lot of, marketing stack integrations. I think it's important because, the current situation is helping people open up to new ideas, right? And do things. And if you're thinking, oh, I have to be Amazon to put all this stuff in place, right? I think you're approaching it wrong. Like a lot of the great software companies that you should be looking for are the ones that have this attitude. They're not trying to shark you into some big deals. They want to de-risk the situation as much as possible and go, look, let's make it as easy for you to come do a small test with us. And if that works, we will scale it from here. If you're getting approached by software vendors who come in and want to put this giant system in place, do all this stuff and rip and replace and charge you all this money off the front, that's where you want to be careful of.
Yep, I agree. So, and again, we will answer these questions somehow, probably via email, I would imagine. So if your question is not answered, please reach out to us at SIA. We're happy to do that. But I thought this was a great question to close with. Is there data showing a change of consumer type? For example, in the outdoor industry, there's a large influx of new users who are less familiar with the outdoors. I think we could definitely say the same for bike. How is this impacting marketing and e-commerce, and what is best practice for identifying the friction points with a new customer base? So I think that's a very good question for us to close on. Who wants to take a swing?
I'll take first stab and say that in bike over the last 6 weeks, it has been a tsunami of new customers. And some of those are bike buyers, as is seen in the high volume of sub $1,500 bikes that are going out the door. But it's also a lot of people that are maybe returning to bike. They had a high quality bike in the garage and they needed new tires and tubes, and so we've seen a lot of kind of common repair parts or new helmets go out the door over the last year or so. I think bike has been largely kind of stuck in a traditional enthusiast market for the majority of sales, but the fastest growing category in bike has been electric bike or electric assist. That has really invited a lot of new people into the sport. And I think there was a question about marketing there, but most retailers lean heavily on email and social media marketing. But if you really want to get in front of a new customer, Google advertising seems to be the best tool.
Great. Ben, did you want to chime in, and then that will wrap things up?
Yeah, I only caught the last bit of the question there. It was kind of a question on a question. Can you repeat it for me?
Oh yeah, of course. So with a new influx of customers right now, obviously, this is an anonymous question, but basically this person is wondering what the best practice is for identifying the friction points with a new customer base.
Oh, that's a good question.
It is.
And
in hindsight, I did not answer it.
Identifying friction points for new customers. There's a million, I think, tools and things out there. We talk about that. It's what I would say is rather than or in tandem, you're trying to do your work, right, to kind of do the data and set up tests and figure out where the friction points are happening with that particular group. It's a group of new consumers that you don't know, but you know, Kristin, you're here putting on a webinar, right? You probably know production guidelines. You can't anticipate all the crazy thing that's going to happen or not work out, or all the frictions that might come up. The best thing to do is look at best practices. Like, so all this stuff we've been talking about making fulfillment and decoupling the transaction, those are proven friction points across that really are so universal. Everybody is experiencing these days. So like, before you go down and A/B test every little thing and get into the micro weeds of what this one long tail little friction might be, like, let's make sure you've solved those, right? If you've made really good progress on these major friction points, like, you're going to have gone a long way to making that new customer a repeat customer, you know, and then you can start to optimize down the line. So sorry if that's kind of an answer, non-answer, but I really do think that these challenges are big enough. Like, you got to tackle some of the stuff we were talking about first before you get down in the weeds.
And I'm happy to pull together, you know, a transcript from this with best practices that we identified for everybody who attended the webinar to have. So I want to thank both of you so much. This literally, I had a feeling it was going to be a great panel, but I have to tell you, you guys both have brought so many great insights and such like a sense of confidence around where we should go next. So please know, I know that you do this every day. It may not seem like you contributed a lot, but you truly did. Like, you really shed a lot of clarity, a lot of light. And really the takeaway is just forward progress. Don't be afraid to modernize. Don't be afraid to test and learn and fail, and make sure your employees know that that's true as well. But ultimately, this is a journey, and we wanted to present you with some steps forward here. And ultimately, we're going to have some great follow-up information for everybody who attended the webinar. And you're also, of course, welcome to reach out and offer any ideas for future town halls or future podcasts in the future that we can bring to you to help light the way. We're in this together, as everybody is telling each other right now, but truly, as specialty businesses, we are in this together, and SIA is there to help the process along. So thank you very much to Ben and Ryan for your time today, and thank you to SIA, and I'll hand it back over to Nick.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan, Ben, Kristin. That was great. If you have any additional questions, as Kristin said, please feel free to email us at info@snowsports.org, and we will be in touch immediately. Please don't forget to visit our industry hub for all the resources you need, and a recording of today's discussion will be posted there tomorrow. In case you want to revisit it, re-listen, you can find it at snowsports.org/COVID hub. Next week's town hall will be an update on the current state of China tariffs with Joseph Brubaker, a trade and tariff expert from Crichton McConkey. Joe will share some insights on what we should be doing now to mitigate the tariff impacts on our businesses, and we'll answer your questions. We'll be sending out registration links soon. Myself and the staff are here for you during these tough times. Please lean on us. This is why we're here. This is what we do, and we will get through this and become stronger because of it. Again, thank you very much. Stay healthy and have a great day.
Thank you.